que todo está perdido. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Tanta sangre que se llevó el río. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. No será tan fácil, ya sé qué pasa. No será tan simple como pensaba, como abrir el pecho y sacar el alma. Una cuchillada del amor. Luna de los pobres siempre abierta. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón como un documento inalterable. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón y uniré las puntas de un mismo lazo y me iré tranquilo, me iré despacio y te daré todo y tú me darás algo que me alivie un poco más. La 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 la, hey oh. Yeah, yeah. Na na la 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 na. Oh Peter, my dear friend, we're keeping going on with your palabra y corazón. Cuando no haya nadie cerca o lejos, yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Cuando los satélites no alcancen, yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Y hablo de países y de esperanza. Hablo por la vida, hablo por la nada. Hablo de cambiar esta nuestra casa. De cambiarla por cambiar no más. De cambiarla por cambiar no más. De cambiarla por cambiar no más. ¿Quién dijo que todo está perdido? Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón. Yo vengo a ofrecer mi corazón.
Mil gracias, Francisco. Creo que es muy oportuno para abrir este evento. Queremos venir a ofrecer el corazón, aunque suene raro en un evento académico, y esta invitación que nos haces es muy apropiada. Eh, vamos a empezar con el panel. We're going to start with our panel today. We have a very stellar lineup for it. Tenemos un grupo de intelectuales y de personas cercanas a Peter. Si hay un punto en común en todos los que estamos hoy es que somos amigos, fuimos amigos durante la vida de Peter y hoy vamos a comentar este libro de él que fue publicado en inglés en el año 2017 y que ahora está siendo lanzado al español. Vamos a tener un panel con la participación. We're going to have a panel with the participation of el profesor Duncan Kennedy, profesor emérito de la Escuela de Derecho de la Universidad de Harvard, con Gary Peller, profesor de Derecho de Georgetown en la ciudad de Washington. Tenemos a Nanette Shore. Nanette es una practicante holística del derecho y fundadora del proyecto para la integración del espíritu, el derecho y la política, The Project for Integrating Spirit, Law and Politics. Está, por supuesto, también Lisa Jacks, que fue la compañera de vida de Peter y que también dedicó su vida a ser lideresa y organizadora del movimiento sindical en los Estados Unidos. Y también voy a estar yo, Diego López Medina, profesor de la Universidad de los Andes. La dinámica es muy sencilla. Vamos a darle la palabra unos 10 a 15 minutos. We're gonna have each one of these speakers speak for 15 or so minutes. Y luego de eso vamos a tener una discusión. Si tienen preguntas, las pueden dirigir al chat y yo trataré de integrarlas al diálogo. After each one of our speakers, we're going to have a dialogue for 30 or so minutes, where we are also going to accept questions from you in the chat, and I'm going to try to interweave those questions and comments into the conversation. So we start off with you, Professor Kennedy. Empezamos contigo, Duncan. Thank you.
Good. So it is an incredible pleasure to be here. It's a very moving occasion. The song was fantastic. It's very emotional for me to celebrate this translation of Peter's work. He was a very close friend of mine and a very dear friend. And I know of him that one of the things that meant an enormous amount to him was he longed to be translated. He longed for his book to reach beyond the confines of the United States. So when Diego got involved and we heard Diego's reaction to the book, it made Peter very, very happy. That's all I can say. Now, it also made me happy for a different reason, which is that I know Diego as a scholar, but I also know him as a translator, because Diego has translated a number of my works, and his translations are brilliant. So this is a very unusual thing to be able to say about someone else's book. I have no doubt that Diego has served Peter extremely beautifully well. And for that reason, I think I'm going to begin by saying something about the art. One of the problems of translation is to grasp a style. And so let me say something about Peter's style. So it's a very unusual book as written. It's a very unusual book in many ways. But one of the most unusual things about it is the voice, the style in which it's written. It's an innovative style. It's an art style. In other words, it's meant to strike you as not what you're used to reading, especially as a reading of a book that obviously is some combination of philosophy and social science with a tiny bit of law, not very much. The voices that we're used to in those disciplines is the author who is trying hard not to sound like anybody in particular. The voice and the style is supposed to be the mirror of the thought or the idea, but Peter's style is transformative of the idea. The medium is part of the message. And let me characterize it before I read an example of it. The lines, the sentences are very, very long. It's very long, way too long by the usual thoughts about how to write good sentences. And they're also composed of semi-independent clauses which come and go and repeat themselves. So it's got a musical quality to it. It often seems like you're not listening to someone reading a structured presentation of thoughts, but rather musing, speculating, coming and going, and appealing to you partly by the warmth and softness of the voice, its quality of, but it's also very abstract. So it's a puzzle, which is it, although it's composed of complicated ideas strung together, it's still informal. So I'm going to read a passage, which is good to read because this passage is also, I think, close to the key to the book. So here I'm trying to also introduce Peter's ultimate ambition goal, which is to be, I think, a theorist and practitioner and exponent of intersubjectivity. Intersubjectivity in the most positive sense of intersubjectivity, as you'll see. So I'll read this very slowly and then say something about the ideas that are embedded in the style. This is Peter. When I speak of re-spiritualizing the world, what I mean is simply that we human beings are bound together by spirit, that there is a vibrant life force that unites us and that is social and in nature, although invisible to the naked objectifying eye. And more, that the longings of this social spirit are at the core of our search for meaning in life and are at the core of all human motivation in the realm of politics, economics, psychology, personal life, everything. So that's his most passionate idea. He never varied during the time I knew him. He knew this was his basic idea as a very young man. When I met him, he was in his 20s. So it was already completely there in him, in his practice, in his understanding of things. However, Peter is not a typical New Age practitioner of intersubjectivity because there is a deeply negative aspect of his understanding of the social situation. And this is, I think, what allowed him to be a brilliant speaker and a brilliant former of communities. He wasn't in denial of the dark side. So Peter was, in fact, a theorist of the dark side. I'm not going to say a lot more about that, but I'm going to read another example of Peter's voice. And this is a passage which illustrates the way he understands the deeply dark side of our situation, in which the voice of spirit that is intersubjective and merges with the other has been put aside in the place of what he calls the false self or the mask, which derives from our fear of connection to the other. So this is an example of how life works in this alienated universe. This is two people, strangers passing in the street. Although each of us does seek to empty our eyes of presence and turn them into ocular globes visible from the outside only, in reality, what we do manifest to each other is an aversive presence. We attempt to become blank or absent, but the very work of attempting to be so reveals our residual presence, that we are really in there, resisting a pull toward the other, toward each other. So this is the fallen state. And his model is fairly straightforward. The answer is social movement. The answer is to participate with other people fully, with the wholehearted, all possibilities in social movements to transform society. Collective action. Is that his answer to how we can escape the alienation of looking at the blank face of the other while we put forward our own blank face, is to crack that and get rid of it. So now I'm going to describe this position of Peter's. I'm going to try to contextualize it in the minutes that I've got left as an intersection of three different American developments and a European development. So it's very, very American. The three deeply formative elements are generational rebellion in the 1960s. And generational rebellion operates across the whole society. It's not necessarily against your parents, because Peter adored his parents and was deeply devoted to them. But he was an arch participant in the rejection of the qualities of mind, spirit, culture, formation of the older generation, which his parents were good members of a bad generation. That's the model. And that is something that happened across millions and millions and millions of Americans. It wasn't everybody, and many people hated it from the beginning. Many of our contemporaries hated it. But the second thing was the counterculture. Even more didn't like the counterculture, was also a mass cultural phenomenon which transcended generations and race and sex and class. Although it was always divided those ways, it was always divided, it nonetheless went beyond and was above and beyond. The counterculture was the conviction that there were other new forms of art, new forms of love, new forms of relationships. This includes the sexual revolution, but it also includes rock and roll. So the counterculture is the sense of the possibility of the new that's embodied in us, that we're producing every day by our practice. Then the third thing was the movement. So there's the generational rebellion, there's the counterculture, and then there's the movement. And the movement is self-organized. Basically, it's hundreds of thousands, but not millions. It's fewer people than the counterculture and fewer people than the generation. It's a subset of people who understand themselves nonetheless to be expressing both the generational rebellion and the countercultural creation of new culture, but also the agenda of changing society through action, sometimes direct action, sometimes indirect action. It's totally internally varied. There are people who, are fanatics and love violence. There are people who are completely devoted to nonviolence at every level of the spirit, but they're all then, they have a music, which is rock and roll, which Pete loves, which is derived from the counterculture, but also they have a practice of, in the movement, of understanding the movement. The movement is a spiritual practice as well as a political practice, though people disagree about the nature of the spiritual practice. And Peter has an analysis of a critique of how it ended badly, which is basically partly that it was repressed, but partly that we, the participants, gave into our fear of the other within the movement, that we split and fractured. Our internal spirit was defeated, and we ended up being paranoid or being intensely full of rage against authority, or being bureaucratizing the movement, another disaster, and equal. So he puts the responsibility on us along this repression, of course. And the message is, for the next movement, we need to train ourselves to be better than that. Now, I want to just read, because I have the chance, I want to read to close a little tribute to Peter, the guy. So he was an incredibly good friend, and he's someone who seduced you deeply into the love character of the interaction. So here's what I wrote about him. The phrase beautiful soul fits Peter in my mind. Sunny 60s garage rocker, clear-sighted about how the sunny 60s went wrong, visionary counterculturalist, and also pragmatic builder of it wherever he found himself. When a dream he dreamed, when a dream faded, he dreamed some more, finding new ways to harness his gifts to his liberation agenda. It worked. It was amazing to organize with him in our critical legal studies mini movement, watching him woo or distance bad actors, staying up all night drunk on solidarity, listening to him hungover the next morning, but still winding up the room, making it vibrate with humor and hope. His dying doesn't seem real to me. Thank you.
Gracias, Duncan. Thank you, Duncan. It's now the turn of Professor Gary Peller. Él es profesor de Georgetown University. Gary, go ahead. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Diego. Thank you, Duncan. I'm also missing Peter so much. I want to talk a little bit about what I learned from Peter in terms of social activism and social change. I consider this really the most important question that philosophy and all the kind of like literary arts have to answer in terms of making the world better. And that's a fundamental question that just arises, and that's, why don't the people revolt or resist to transform the world? And it's hard to deny that it's apparent to many of us that the people have at least more potential power than they're exercising. And to the opposite of people ready to resist or revolt, we see in North America and in Europe the rise of millions of people, including the working class, the formerly Marxist agents of revolution, seemingly identified and committed to the exact opposite of what we consider progressive social change. This is to me, such an important fundamental question to answer. We see the commitment to the church or the company or the image, the fantasy of getting rich or getting ahead as occupying the constituency of revolution. And then we have in our environment various theories on social power and progressive theories of social power. And I don't want to generalize. I mean, this is obviously overgeneralizing, but there's something true about all the theories that we've kind of inherited and used, and that is that they all imagine the kind of victims of power, the objects of power, as having power imposed on them. Whether it's the proletariat by the relations of class relations with the other classes, or whether it's women in the patriarchy, or whether it's the white supremacist structure. These structuralist interpretations that we've interpreted all share what became known as the problem of agency. How do they account for anybody even comprehending what these theories are supposed to be saying if everybody is just kind of being imposed on with the false ideology and all that? And so these theories have gotten very subtle. I think Michel Foucault and his followers' theories are probably as subtle as you can get to this, where it's not just a kind of one-way street, where it's imagined there's a dialectical relationship. I realized I was talking too fast. I get excited and nervous. and then I talk too fast, so I'm going to slow down for the translation. But a point at which the Foucault point at which the comprehension is that people actually, that the structures actually produce the people. It's not so much imposing on people, but the structures are speaking through the people in a way. Okay, well, maybe that's as far as you can go with that. But the question is, how can the people ever revolt, and what holds them down? And so this is where Peter's, I think, unique contribution, at least from my perspective, comes in, and that's to understand that all power, all structures of power, all ideologies, all social forces, they have to work in a consciousness and psyche and in a being of some kind. This doesn't mean the substitution of liberal individualism as the starting point for theoretical analysis. What it does mean, though, is a deeper understanding, even than Michel Foucault, as grand as Foucault is, of course, a deeper understanding of how people become enlisted in what we call their own oppression, how it's actually motivated. And Peter was a student of the motivation of people to believe in and to act out structures that were against their interests. I can't count how many times I'm more of a Leninist. I have more of a Leninist background. I'll just admit it. It's us versus them, Peter. And Peter, time and time. I mean, in some examples, I don't want Peter to have to defend himself from the grave, but some examples were just too much for me, Peter. But Peter would always try to comprehend, why are they like that? Where are they coming from? It's not just, oh, the Southern white working class is our enemy, and then we got to mobilize and get enough minorities to vote against them. But to comprehend what exactly is motivating, say, the Southern working class, or I'll say the extreme example, and I want to just leave it hanging, or the working people in Germany who supported the Nazis. What motivated them? How to understand them? And it's that unbelievable well of empathy that was required to see. And Peter did see. And what Peter saw was the structure of what he came to discuss and describe so beautifully in some of the descriptions that Duncan shared. The world of alienation, the world of people not longing to connect, but not connecting, of believing in false things that seem to normalize the disconnection. And Peter studied borrowing from bringing in psychoanalysis into social theory and philosophy and hermeneutics and epistemology and onto all the stuff. And Lang and Erich Fromm, I think, were also important influences, trying to understand the emotive quality of people clinging to what Peter called a false sense of community in patriotism, or in racism, or in sexism, and so that opens up a whole new vista of political organizing. I just want to say, at a very practical level, we can organize each other against alienation, and that tent is much bigger than progressives or feminists. Or the tent against alienation includes the older people who have been put out to pasture too young by the people who think they know what's going on in the world. It includes all kinds of marginalized, all over the place. The constituency is no longer the logical agent of historical change, the lumpen proletariat and the proletariat combining to become the subject object of history, blah, blah, blah. It's not that at all. It's almost a universal kind of, and this is, I had some disagreements with Peter, and this is one of them. I'm not sure it really is universal, but this is an inspiring image of a much broader tent that's energized by the truth of the intersubjectivity that Duncan described, that rather than deny as the road to partisanship or distortion or passion, to embrace the passion, to embrace the spirit, to embrace the intersubjective longing, to give in to, as opposed to resist, the longing to be with one another. It's a really inspiring image. And And so I'll just stop with saying that the idea of breaking on through from the doors that Peter quoted so often has always appealed to me as well, and it's a ground for a broadened sense of what political activism consists of. So I learned a lot from Peter. I'm so grateful that particularly he shared this book, and so happy that it's going to be shared with a wider audience.
Gracias, Gary. Thank you, Gary. Ahora el turno es para Nanette Shore. Nanette Shore es practicante holística del derecho y fundadora del proyecto Ojalá un movimiento for integrating spirit law and politics, para la integración del espíritu, el derecho y la política. I was saying, Nanette, that you were the founder of the project for integrating spirit law and politics, hopefully the movement for integrated spirit law and politics. Adelante, Nanette. Gracias.
Thank you, Diego. And actually the co-founder with Peter and many others. Thank you so much. It is absolutely wonderful to be here with you. Greetings from New York City. I am just delighted to be part of this event at the University of the Andes, and and to follow Duncan and Gary and Francisco's beautiful song. Peter always spoke about the importance of the movement of social energy. And what I feel in the social energy here today, as it's been embodied so far in everything that we've heard, is a depth of passion and commitment and dedication to sharing with you who Peter was. And I would like to continue in that way so that you can continue to feel connected to him and to the spirit of this wonderful book. So as Duncan had discussed, Peter always spoke a lot about the counterculture, the movements for social, cultural, political change in the late 1960s and the early 70s, the civil rights movement, workers' rights, women's rights, the student movements, the counterculture generally, and what he described as the radiant spirit of idealism in the air at that time. He also spoke often of the power of the non-rational to bind us. He wanted to infuse everything he was doing with a feeling of solidarity, whether it was building an alternative university, which he did, the New College of California, or leading a campaign in his own home neighborhood, or building our PISLAP movement, which I will speak of later. And I have some wonderful colleagues from PISLAP joining us here today. He always sought to pull us closer toward the experience of mutual recognition. In an essay that Peter wrote that was published in a different book of his, an earlier book called Another Way of Seeing, which is somewhat more to do with the law than the book that was translated, Peter spoke of the importance of what he described as the experience of moral dislocation, social isolation, meaninglessness, as the most spiritually painful aspect of modern culture. And Duncan and Gary have already spoken to that. And he also began very often in whatever he was speaking of or writing with a discussion of the infant and their open-hearted, loving presence, and how the sense of distance and fear of the other unfolded. And of course, the reason that this experience is so painful and the longing that we have is so profound is because the desire to be recognized and seen by each other is so powerful. I wanted to read a short quote from The Desire for Mutual Recognition. It relates to the point I was just making. He says, "The world as it really is suffused with moral longing that pulls upon the conscience of humanity to elevate ourselves from the limitations of what is toward the realization of what ought to be. The evocation of precisely that longing has been the decisive force behind every social movement that has advanced the development of humanity toward a loving and humane common existence since the beginning of time." So describing that experience of non-recognition and the ways it manifests in our social arena, as Gary was saying, is core to Peter's writing, and to not only to his writing, but to his movement building and his, and his relationships with others. In whatever he was a part of, Peter helped us feel the longing that we had for connection. And then he went and helped us build and co-create a community to express it. Peter felt strongly that this spiritual dimension that we're describing, and he's described so beautifully in his book, was missing from many social movements. And in his own work, he aimed to reintroduce this. And he says this very clearly in The Desire for Mutual Recognition. Wanted to give you, read another quote, sorry. A transformation and elevation of social space that brings us into authentic contact with each other and makes us present to each other, while also enabling us to know that this is occurring and gradually become what we are intending. Of course, the projects of social activism are always particular and practical. And I think here we can pause and, insert in there whatever causes and work each of us is personally connected to. But he goes on, their transformative aspect is in the universal meaning to be realized through each particular project. To create a world that realizes our desire for a loving world, each project must be a healing and repairing of our alienation through the realization of each practical end. So I want to say now a few words about the work that I did with Peter and just about my own background, just as context. So I'm a practicing lawyer. I work in an organization that provides free legal representation to people living in poverty. We fight for racial, social, and economic justice, but we also seek to foster or develop the healing-centered practices and approaches to the law. I met Peter in the mid-1990s as part of a larger work that was called the Politics of Meaning movement that was advanced by a magazine called Tikkun and its editor, Michael Lerner. And Peter and Michael were very close collaborators. PISLAP, the Project for Integrating Spirituality, Law, and Politics, emerged from a gathering of 1,800 social activists in Washington, D.C. back in 1996. And in that event, people from all different sectors of society spoke about their vision, whether it was medicine, law, education, the environment, many other areas as well, union organizing, of how they could imagine their sector transforming. And so PISLAP was really born at that gathering. Our aim in PISLAP is to support the development of a legal system and culture that is grounded in empathy, compassion, and care, similar to drawing on Peter's ideas, of course. We're based in the United States, but we are international in our membership. And some of our areas of focus, and I think this will make a lot of sense in light of everything you've heard about Peter so far, is in fostering the use of restorative practices and relationship-based mediation in criminal law and civil law and in human, in conflict, in community conflict, helping to humanize both the law itself, the content of the law, as well as the way legal proceedings are conducted to foreground compassion, reconciliation, and responsibility for the well-being of the other, as well as our own. And ensuring that legal education has strong ethical content and that it's taught in a way that really emphasizes the human relationships that are affected. Peter would also often talk about imagine how the people felt in the cases, what was happening beneath the surface. And there's a famous example that I know many of you in PISLAP have heard, where he analyzed a particular case, and in order to teach it, he actually reached out and found the people involved back in, I think the grandchild of the person who was injured many years ago, and spoke to them about what that experience was like, and then brought that to his teaching. So in PISLAP, we aim to keep our conversation about social justice grounded in a spirit of open-heartedness. And Peter would never let us fall into a sort of a conventional discourse. We speak of a legal system and culture that heals the separation and disconnect between self and other that is at the heart of so much social conflict. And for Peter, lawyering was an activity where we could potentially bring our full selves. Peter, just in terms of working with him, was a master organizer and never asked others to do things that he was not ready to do himself. He was filled with optimism, but as Gary said, he was also very discerning and certainly had an eye for understanding the dark side and also for authenticity. He not only wrote about his ideas, but he lived them, and he always elevated and nurtured the leadership of others. Although he had brilliant insights, but they were always tempered by humility. So I'll put in the chat for those who are interested the link to our website, spiritlawpolitics.org, and also I'll put Peter's website link in there, petergableauthor.com, because you will find there, as well as on YouTube, a treasure trove of videos and shorter writings that will complement your understanding of the desire for mutual recognition. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Nanette. Thank you very much. Wonderful. Now it is my turn. Me gustaría hablar en español. I think I'm going to speak in Spanish. So for our English speakers, you can go down to the Zoom screen, and down you'll find close to screen share interpretation, and there will be a channel in English. In English, yes, because I'll be speaking Spanish. So, ¿qué tal si lo probamos? Y me dicen si están oyendo adecuadamente. Yo quiero agradecerle mucho a mis colegas hoy en el panel. Creo que es una ocasión muy bonita para el lanzamiento del libro. Aquí está lo tengo en la mano. Este libro, como cuento, lo conocí en una reunión en los Estados Unidos con Peter, y donde también estaba Gary y Duncan. Y lo leí con alguna indiferencia comenzando la pandemia, pero luego me tocó muy profundamente el corazón. Y este es un libro que yo creo que su principal virtud es que no solamente toca la cabeza, sino que también toca el corazón. Lo traduje, voy a contarles las razones. Yo siempre he querido en el derecho encontrar una vocación y un sentido, y a veces en vez de vocación y sentido uno termina con una profesión. Y este libro, como Nanette acaba de decir, ayuda profundamente a encontrar la vocación y el sentido en una profesión que tiene síntomas muy notorios de un desierto, de que se está convirtiendo en un desierto. Yo creo que a veces es una profesión fría, a veces perdida, con bajo compromiso ético. Hablando con estudiantes, estoy encontrando no solamente abogados después de muchos años de práctica quemados del ejercicio profesional, sino que también estoy encontrando a estudiantes en los últimos años de carrera también relativamente quemados y desilusionados. Muchos llegamos a la profesión con la vocación o con la idea de generar cambio social, con visiones altamente idealistas, de convivencia, de una justicia restaurativa que ayudara a las personas a recuperar sus proyectos vitales, y en vez de eso hemos encontrado un ping-pong institucional de argumentos que van y vienen, donde es fácil perder el sentido de las cosas que estamos haciendo. Eh, mi idea era hoy estar en Bogotá, en el evento presencial en un salón en la Universidad de los Andes, y me tuve que quedar porque me cancelaron el vuelo. Y quisiera hablar un poquito de la cancelación del vuelo, si ustedes me lo permiten. El vuelo nos lo cancelaron y lo primero que nos dijo el piloto es que había una falla en el motor. Hubo una especie de callada y disciplinada comprensión, incluso alivio, que no nos llevaran en un avión con una potencial falla. En ese momento, en el avión todos nos paramos, hubo un pequeño flachazo como de reconocimiento, unos ayudaron a los otros a bajar la maleta, nos bajamos ordenadamente, incluso con colaboración y diálogo entre nosotros que no había ocurrido mientras que abordábamos el avión. Ese pequeño flachazo de reconocimiento, sin embargo, se empezó a desvanecer cuando nos llevaron a un counter de la aerolínea y nos pusieron en una fila contingente sin ninguna razón en particular. Los que primero llegaron ahí se hicieron en primer lugar y empezamos a darnos cuenta que los que llegaban en primer lugar podían quizás resolver su problema más rápidamente que los otros, y empieza a haber una transformación muy significativa del espacio psicoemocional que nos rodeaba. El momento incluso del rompimiento de toda solidaridad o todo reconocimiento del otro ocurrió cuando los señores de la aerolínea mencionaron que iban a atender primero a los que estaban en las clases superiores del avión. Eso rompió completamente la solidaridad de la fila, la molestia empezó a notarse de forma muy fuerte. Una señora se pasó toda la fila delante de nosotros y un señor que estaba delante mío le reclamó porque se había pasado la fila y ella le devolvió amablemente diciéndole, no, perdóneme, es que es la clase. Estoy en una clase superior, literalmente le dijo, tratando de justificarle al otro lo que en realidad ya no tenía justificación. La fila como mecanismo de coordinación social se rompió, colapsó el mecanismo de tal manera que todo el mundo se abalanzó al counter. Unos pocos momentos de ayuda a personas extranjeras. Varias personas eran turistas extranjeros. Estoy hablando de un vuelo en Colombia con muchos turistas extranjeros sin hablar español. Al comienzo los estábamos guiando y ayudando a entender qué estaba pasando con el vuelo. Esos pequeños gestos de solidaridad se rompieron. Agachamos la mirada, nos ensimismamos, esa es una bella expresión de Ortega y Gasset, nos ensimismamos en nuestros propios pensamientos y preocupaciones. Yo mismo empecé a tener un enorme dolor de cabeza, no era posible que después de todo este esfuerzo no pudiera llegar a Bogotá al lanzamiento del libro. Tuve varias peleas en la fila tratando de mantener mi lugar y de afirmar mi lugar en la fila, en la jerarquía. Me alcancé a acordar del texto de Duncan, del entrenamiento jurídico como preparación para las jerarquías. Y ese momento, esa contrariedad, esa mortificación que tuve, me acordó potentemente de los contenidos del libro. Obviamente en el texto de Peter, él está haciendo una macrosociología. Más que macrosociología, es realmente el esfuerzo por traer psicología social al mundo del derecho. Y yo quisiera este pequeño ejemplo que ofrezco es una pequeña viñeta microsociológica del rompimiento de la empatía, de la solidaridad, incluso de la capacidad de cooperación en un mini movimiento contingente y espontáneo de reacción a un infortunio menor de viaje, que sin embargo es suficiente para ilustrar las dinámicas de alienación, alejamiento, desconfianza que se dan en nuestra sociedad. Y Peter nos pregunta inmediatamente casi la siguiente pregunta que yo tendría que hacerle a mis colegas. Ahí saludo a mis estudiantes de Sociología del Derecho que sé que están en el salón y que no los pude saludar hoy. Entonces les mando un abrazo grande. Y la pregunta es si el derecho es parte de la construcción de esa alienación social. Y quizás sí, el derecho estuvo muy metido y muy incardinado y entroncado en ideas comunitarias. Eso es parte, digamos, de los legados del common law, es parte también de la idea de Gierke, de un derecho comunitario, del Genossenschaftenrecht, pero al mismo tiempo hay un muy intenso proceso en la teoría y en la práctica del derecho, como dice Galtung, para que el derecho se vuelva simplemente el derecho del Estado y de las formaciones alfa, donde lo único que importan son los individuos atomizados, alienados, distanciados por los castillos en los que vivimos metidos. Para mí fue muy interesante ver cómo unas personas que mostraban solidaridad en el avión se iban encastillando y se iban atrincherando detrás de los fosos de sus castillos para simplemente esquivar la mirada en una pelea minúscula, ridícula, por quién llegaba primero a Bogotá o a donde fuera. En esas dimensiones ya no era posible articular un diálogo sobre las prioridades o las preferencias de a quién se debía atender, a quién se le podían dar los pasajes más cercanos a partir de sus dificultades vitales, de la importancia de sus compromisos, etcétera, etcétera. Este es un libro que trae psicología social al mundo del derecho. Hace rato hemos dicho que en el derecho las emociones importan, la racionalización y autonomización del derecho se ha vuelto cada vez más fuerte, el positivismo contribuye a esos procesos de autonomización y racionalización, y el discurso que circula en la filosofía de la importancia de las emociones ha tenido poco o casi ningún impacto en las formas más tradicionales de enseñanza del positivismo jurídico. Incluso Nanette en su momento, cuando se buscó, y esto ocurrió en América Latina, en Estados Unidos, en América Latina y en todo el mundo, pasar de un derecho frío a un derecho cálido, de un derecho desconectado a un derecho empático. Se insistió mucho en la posibilidad de traer técnicas sociales como la mediación, a partir de la cual pudieran existir prácticas restaurativas, derecho colaborativo, justicia restaurativa, justicia terapéutica y en general una mirada más atenta al corazón del otro. Estas miradas, sin embargo, siguen siendo muy marginales en la profesión. Cuando uno habla de estos temas, los abogados y abogadas con enorme frecuencia insisten que el derecho no está ahí, digamos, para generar bienestar humano o interconexión, sino que tan solo es un mecanismo que informa sobre normas vigentes para una tramitación institucional relativamente cruda y fría. Los que quieran ver un argumento en contra de esta visión tan interiorizada de qué es el derecho, yo creo que deberían leer el libro de Peter. A mí me hizo un gran bien en tratar de encontrar la vocación detrás de la profesión, o por lo menos tratar de encontrar algunos elementos para ese propósito. Y pues creo que mi recomendación sería adecuada para aquellos que también en los distintos momentos de sus vidas profesionales, para aquellos que tienen ese mismo objetivo, independientemente, insisto, del momento donde estén en sus vidas profesionales. Bueno, yo también pararía ahí. I want to thank my fellow colleagues for this panel. And I want to ask Jose Hernan, see if in the classroom or from our attendance elsewhere, there are questions that might ignite a little conversation and a little question and answer period. Así que un millón de gracias. No sé, I don't know, Duncan, Gary, Nanette, Lisa, if you want also to say something to spur a little dialogue amongst ourselves. Lisa, please.
Lisa, you're muted. You're muted, Lisa.
Great. I don't know if this will spur dialogue, but I just have to say thank you. Francisco and Duncan and Gary and Nanette sort of brought Peter back to me today. And of course, I miss him terribly. And I think he would feel that you really did, as he would say, evoke the feeling meanings of his beliefs. And that would be, he would just be thrilled that this is happening. And then in particular, Duncan, that you put so much effort into that comprehensive, insightful, and feisty, you guys always had to argue about something, introduction was so beautiful and made him so happy. And I want to also thank Magnolia Prada Rivas, who might be on this call, for making the publication of this translation a reality. I'm so grateful to you. And I want to let Diego know that I was looking through the emails between Diego and Peter this morning that they wrote back and forth while Diego was doing the translation. And I wanted to just share with you a couple of things they said to each other. Diego wrote to Peter saying, "Now, by drawing down, do you mean like a veil being pulled over something?" And Peter said, yes, that's what I mean. And another one he asked about was, and by Stepford waiter, do you mean like an automaton? And Peter said, yes. And then at one point, Diego said he felt as he was doing the work that he began to see his role as the spiritualizer of Peter's words in another language. And Peter was totally blissed out by that idea. And I just say this because he and I wondered early on, since neither of us read Spanish, how are we going to know if Diego captures the feelings that convey the meaning of Peter's work? And just after these exchanges, he said to me, Diego really gets it. And so I just want to thank you, Diego. One other thing I think Peter would say today if he was here is that he'd want to say to the people who are organizing this movement to end the war in Gaza how very important their movement is, and that he hopes they will learn from our mistakes that we on the left have made in our movements, that as Duncan described earlier, that he hopes that you will, when things get hard, and they always do in movements, that you won't turn on each other, and that you won't allow the splintering and the division and the weakening of your movement that has happened oftentimes in past movements, but that instead you see each other and you mutually recognize each other, and you muster your compassion for each other when fear and anger surfaces, and keep your movement going. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. I understand that Jose has some reactions and questions from Bogota and elsewhere. Jose?
Diego?
Sí, te escuchamos.
Listo. We do have one question. I think you know the one that has the question. I'm gonna give the mic to him.
Hello, everyone. Well, it was wonderful to have you here and to hear you all, guys. I would like to speak in Spanish if it's possible to, I don't know if it's a question or something else. Bueno, hay un aporte vital en el libro que yo creo que Diego resalta con mucha potencia, y es la idea de que estamos experimentando en nuestras sociedades un malestar, y que ese malestar está relacionado con la imposibilidad de superar ciertas estructuras o jerarquías que lo que hacen es ensimismarnos todo el tiempo e impiden la posibilidad de que conectemos con los demás en esa experiencia vital. Y yo creo que el libro es, en esencia, una contribución a cómo superar otras formas de teoría social que pensaban únicamente como en una política mucho más contenciosa y mucho más en el uso instrumental del derecho. Y en eso me parece que es fundamental el avance que presenta el libro. Pero tal vez la duda viene de cómo utilizamos el derecho para que reconozca efectivamente a las demás personas en el campo de los movimientos sociales y a partir de una ética de la diversidad. ¿Por qué lo digo? Porque los movimientos sociales, incluso aquellos que han inyectado esperanza a la política contemporánea, pensemos por ejemplo en los movimientos feministas alrededor del globo, una de las dificultades que sucede y una de las reacciones que generan es que cuando se utiliza el derecho, antes que estabilizar o generar una sensación de mayor reconocimiento con los opositores o quienes se resisten a estos proyectos políticos, lo que genera por el contrario cuando se usa en el derecho es la sensación de que se está utilizando casi como un arma en contra de esa resistencia. Entonces terminan los movimientos sociales, incluso aquellos que tienen una mayor capacidad para inyectar esperanza en el mundo, ensimismados también en lógicas instrumentales del derecho y sin pudiendo salir como de ese juego de poder y distributivo que genera el derecho muchas veces y que por eso es tan tentador en el uso de los movimientos sociales. Entonces yo creo que en el libro hay como unas claves de cómo el derecho podría despertar este tipo de acto de reconocimiento antes que de resistencia, pero quería como escucharlos de ustedes sobre ese tema.
Okay, so that's a big question about social movements and the impact of legal strategies within social movements from a rather skeptical point of view. And so I don't know who wants to jump up first.
I think Nanette should jump up first, seeing that this question is addressed to something that's central to the whole PISLAP idea.
Anti-skepticism?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, in PISLAP, we talk a lot about, you know, the role of the law to move social forces and to impact social forces. And yes, law, as you were saying, and thank you for law can be used as an instrument to push down social forces, to defeat them. So I think, you know, the in PISLAP we talk about the importance. So the law is really a tool. It's part of the social movement is what is most important, and the law embodies and reflects, hopefully, what the social movement is trying to accomplish. But I think I don't think that the law itself can really, without the social movement, can accomplish the changes that we want to seek. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that was the thought I had.
Great.
I just have a small comment on that, and I'll say it in Spanish if you allow me. En su momento, cuando empezó a hablar, en su momento cuando se empezó a hablar de justicia comunitaria, en ese momento la idea era traer formas de justicia más cercana, más dulce, más terapéutica, y se utilizó lo que en su momento se llamó el movimiento antropológico para tratar de cimentar lo que llamaron en ese momento el trasplante de ideas del tercer mundo, específicamente de África y América Latina, al primer mundo, y luego a partir de los Estados Unidos en una ola de dispersión de ideas de mediación que se suponía podrían generar una justicia más restaurativa, más terapéutica, en un movimiento parcial, pequeño, disgregado, que sin embargo, muy curiosamente fue resistido, y voy a hablar del argumento de Bill Feldsteiner en su momento, cuando oponiéndose a la mediación y su capacidad de funcionar en los Estados Unidos, mostró una desconexión entre la estructura social y las comunidades o los círculos de referencia que necesitaba la mediación. Y Feldsteiner hace, digamos, responde hermosamente diciendo, o por lo menos dicientemente responde diciendo que la mediación no va a funcionar porque en los Estados Unidos y en general en las sociedades hiperindividualizadas, la mejor forma de gestionar los conflictos es el avoidance, la evitación mutua. Y por lo tanto la estructura social hiperindividualista y monádica solo tiene la evitación de las personas, ni siquiera de los conflictos de las personas, como principal forma de absorción de la conflictividad humana. Eso lo que va generando, digamos, es una especie de sociedad cada vez más abierta. Galtung va a hablar de fragmentación social y de deculturación, y ese fenómeno del avoidance, pues la información empírica que tenemos en países de América Latina muestra que el avoidance, la evitación de la mirada del otro, es casi una de las formas fundamentales de gestión de conflictos. En Colombia se han venido haciendo encuestas en los últimos 10 años de necesidades jurídicas insatisfechas, y en Colombia, comillas, tercer mundo, se reporta que alrededor del entre el 40 y el 45% de todos los conflictos la gente los tramita a través de avoidance, porque ya no existen círculos sociales a los que uno pueda anclar ni la mediación por un lado, ni otras formas, digamos, de gestión de conflictos. Obviamente la avoidance se complementa con un sistema de justicia estatal formal increíblemente frío y colapsado, y en general los movimientos sociales solo ven en el derecho unas dinámicas muy formales donde no hay ningún input sobre, digamos, la calidad psicoemocional, sobre el ambiente psicoemocional en el que se gestionan los conflictos. Discursos de este tipo siguen siendo rechazados no solamente por abogados, sino también por estudiantes de derecho. Y yo insisto, Nanette, que este es un punto donde el texto de Peter nos ayuda como invitación para recuperar un tono psicoemocional que en el derecho se ha perdido por distintas razones y que tanto Gary como tú misma, Nanette, como Peter y como Duncan han también señalado en sus obras. Gracias.
Perhaps to add one thing growing out of what Diego said, you know, we in the work that I do in my organization, which really grew out of PISLAP, we have seen the power of mediation and restorative practices in healing rifts in communities and really building a sense of social cohesion. And I think you know, there is certainly a lot of there was a lot of feeling against that, a lot of skepticism. But over time, it is becoming, at least we're you know, more accepted and more embraced. And the potential for mediation and restorative justice, restorative practices to repair, to heal conflict, I think is only growing. So I just wanted to reference that in relation to what Diego was bringing up.
Gracias. Duncan, Gary, Lisa.
I don't really have anything to add. Is David still there? I would ask a follow-up to David.
Sure.
I wasn't really, I had the sense that David had a particular concern, but I couldn't, that there was something in particular that he was asking the question because he was involved in a controversy. And the question would help him solve the controversy. And I'm interested in what the controversy was, if I'm right about that, and what's you know, what's going on with the question, kind of, unless I'm missing something.
David, ¿estás por ahí en el salón? I don't know if David is
Sí.
still in the
Diego.
classroom, Gary.
That's okay.
Diego?
Let me see.
Yeah. I'm very
Yeah.
hesitant. David, I'm so sorry to put you on the spot. You're a student sitting there. You were good enough to ask a question. Now I'm asking you a question. I hope that's okay with you.
Un poco de contexto sobre la pregunta. ¿Hay alguna polémica o alguna pelea en la que tú estabas metido, David, que tú
Sí, yo
que
creo que es como,
pudieras explicar a nuestros panelistas?
claro, yo creo que es como una pregunta en general sobre cómo el derecho puede servir como una herramienta de emancipación, porque un poco lo que sucede o lo que hemos visto con los...
No, está apagado el micrófono, David. No, el micrófono,
hear
debe
you.
ser el Zoom. Si
Zoom is
José
on.
está por ahí, nos puede ayudar a encenderlo.
Aló, aló.
No, está muteado
Diego. Diego, ¿me escucha? Entonces vamos a hacerlo desde acá. Tienes que gritar.
Ya, ahí sí, ahí ya se desmuteó, entonces, no, otra vez muteado.
¿Qué habrá pasado, marica? ¿Aló? Qué raro que no escuchen. Diego, ¿nos escucha? Es que,
Yes,
are you listening to us?
we can hear
So
you.
we have two channels. Actually, you are watching David through a phone, and the audio channel is through a computer. So don't pay attention to that. And David,
Adelante, David.
please speak louder.
Aló, ¿me escuchas? Can you hear me, guys?
Yes, yes, thank you, David.
All right, thank you. Bueno, les comentaba, creo que la discusión está en la pregunta general de cómo el derecho puede ayudar o convertirse en una herramienta de emancipación, que creo que es una pregunta muy vieja que proviene de la tradición casi que del pesimismo que existía desde el marxismo, pero que en Colombia la hemos experimentado con fuerza desde la Constitución de 1991, que ha abierto las puertas a ciertas prácticas del derecho y en particular al uso del derecho para ganar derechos, al uso del derecho constitucional como uno de los caminos para alcanzar conquistas sociales y darle reconocimiento a grupos que han sido marginados históricamente. Pero la discusión es que cuando se usa el derecho, todas estas conquistas sociales que se ven como momentos de goce por los movimientos sociales, momentos en donde se experimenta felicidad y en donde hay una potencia por alcanzar el derecho, son también vistos desde otros puntos de vista con muchísima resistencia. Y entonces es como si estuviéramos todo el tiempo en una dialéctica del derecho como una navaja de doble filo. Entonces, cuando alguien la tiene, la celebra, pero del otro lado está cortando otras formas de representar el mundo y generando resistencia. Eh, y claro, yo creo que eso tiene que ver con la misma textura del derecho, en el sentido de que el derecho ofrece múltiples posibilidades y en una sociedad es un mecanismo de distribución de recursos, pero también tiene que ver con algo que se ha trabajado desde, por ejemplo, la teoría de la ideología de Zizek o desde Julieta Lemaitre, que hablan de que el derecho también genera un goce en el momento en el que se consigue, genera un fetiche, pero también genera resistencias sociales. Entonces, un poco esa visión del derecho, como lo dice Diego, es una visión formalista, por supuesto, y tal vez la pregunta es cómo podemos imprimir otras formas de uso del derecho que agreguen capacidad de reconocimiento y no tanto de resistencia, sino es un tema de reconocer derechos, sino de, como de pronto lo proponía Diego, casi que una nueva práctica en la forma y en el paradigma de la justicia para las sociedades contemporáneas. No sé, eso es como la discusión grandota.
Did you hear that, Gary?
Yes, I heard it in Spanish. I still want to respond.
Go ahead. Go
Is
ahead.
that terrible? It's
No, quiet on the contrary.
I believe from body language and the words that I did understand that I should say this, that Peter's treatment of one of his main treatments of law as a tool of justice in the book is the codification in American legislation of civil rights. And he talked about how the movement for that legislation was a movement that manifested the intersubjective passion and recognition of a movement transforming the reality of the space, mass movements and people leaving their ordinary roles as janitors and home workers to resist and accomplish, and the achievement of the legislation seemed to reflect that human and social movement. But Peter also was joined with much critical legal studies work in being skeptical and critical of the idea that the institutionalization in law of rights like the legislation could put to rest the political questions. And that, I mean, that's been obvious from the treatment of race, from the treatment of race in America. But the particular thing I think, again, this is I hope not rude of me to respond to what I think you said based on your body language, David. But the part of the resistance to the idea of legislation is the idea that the false idea that crystallizing the movement in an institutionalized language with the enforcement of the state, that was the object, because that actually is the reproduction of alienation, of now the laws being enforced without any of the spirit that gave rise to the law in the first place. The law is being enforced, and this is the deep thing, in a merely bureaucratic way. Yes, we won a bureaucratized victory that is ultimately, from the viewpoint of liberation, not really a victory. I heard the word socialism several times, but I'm not sure if it meant what I think it meant. But much of the embrace of socialism, at least in my lifetime and what I'm in contact with, has sadly suffered from a kind of lack of understanding of this very point, that the attempt to bureaucratize justice and rules, and, well, in the Soviet example, sugar quotas and grain quotas and everything, that's not really what justice can really reflect. So again, David, I apologize if I've gone way off board in what your comment was.
Gary, actually, David want to elaborate more in English, so I'm gonna give him the microphone.
Well, it was not an elaboration, but thank you, Jose. No, I just wanted to add that I didn't know that translation went off. And to hear me in Spanish, I believe that Gary captured quite well what my thought was. So it was wonderful to hear you. Yeah, and the thing is that exactly what you point is what is my concern, that we felt quite emotional when we achieved that, I don't know, the state recognized something, but that is part of the alienation that create only just shortcomings, very, very short moments of well-being, but long times of disassociation or sadness that in a way are creating barriers to social movement. So, well, thank you. It was wonderful to hear you. And I don't know if we have time, but close to me, there is a friend that wants to ask something. So if you guys have time, I will give you the phone, the micro.
Adelante, sí. Yo creo que we have time for probably one more question and a final comment from everybody. How about that?
That'd be great.
Go. Okay, good. So, adelante, Bogotá.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's quite interesting, the discussion here. We're talking about like the classic differentiation of law as a social change instrument. So when it all started with this discussion about legal mobilization with Simmons in the 70s, this was like central in the discussion, and it's nowadays like vital. Okay, the discussion started with the tension between emancipation and alienation in law. So can law be, well, bring us emancipation? Can it be actually used to solve our problems? Nowadays, like the theory, differentiates between like three uses of law: social mobilization. First one has a, well, transformative tool. The second one has a reivindicative tool. And the third one has a resistance tool. So if we manage to use it as a tool, as a way to not only understand and reach those goals we have, well, we are in a constitutive approach of law, and it actually works sometimes. But now comes again, like the 70s, and the myth of law. You know, the myth of laws that actually, when you get like this, that David was saying, like you get the right, and then you're happy, and then, well, you stop like fighting. but actually that's just the start of the tension of the path. And actually, it's something that well, I've been researching like nowadays, and is how to use law not only has like this goal, but also has a flag to continue the reivindications. And well, actually, for some movements, it works very well. The whole discussion also bring me back, like I actually remembered like the whole theory of emotions and how we reflect in emotions within the social movement, how negative emotions like start like mobilization, but actually the other kind of emotions, love, loyalty, keep the mobilization, going. So I don't have like this skeptical like view of law. I actually think that it can be like emancipating. And well, I think the concern here, like after dealing with this, is more than if law can be used as a tool of social change, is how we take the engine and put it all together with the other, constitutive structures of society, economy, culture, and how we actually like embed it together so it can actually like work. So it's an interesting question and something that I think it's been like discussed, but yeah, that was actually coming on how can we like think further than that and actually use it because it's happening. And the thing that you like it or not, or if you like analyze it like by the other sides, you have actually the answer of the question that is that it's been used, is that it works, but sometimes it works like by the means that it doesn't want to like work, like as you just said, like it actually doesn't works, forget the reivindications the movement want, but the other like things, so it's more like a mix of things, stuff. Yeah, that was it. Thank you.
¿Cuál es tu nombre?
Pablo.
Listo. That's Pablo's question. Pablo. I don't know if anyone wants to address that.
Maybe I can start with a few words, and perhaps my fellow panelists will jump in as well. Thank you, Pablo. I think these are questions that Peter also grappled with, the questions that you are posing. And, the legal system, it can, I think that it is a tool, it is a way to help us shape the public consciousness. And I think that's one of the things Peter spoke about, that we, on the one hand, can it bring us emancipation, you ask? Well, of course it can in some ways, but also it helps us. It's a tool. So when certain laws or legal cases are being decided or being discussed or being argued, it raises a public conversation about the issues beneath those cases and the social attitude and social feelings and how we look at our society. And I think we can, in the legal arena, we can help to through using that dialogue, the legal arena can help us educate others and reshape the way people understand the social order and the relationships in society. So I think it can be a very transformative tool, but maybe not just so much in and of itself, but because of the way it can be used. So that was a thought in response.
I have a slightly different take than Nanette, I guess because and I think Peter would agree with everything we're all saying. I guess I think that it's important to start when we're trying to understand law with the idea that the rules, the vast corpus of rules, are the enactment of the results of past struggles, and they're the structure within, not talking about law reform or lawyers as social agents. The rules are the structure within which people settle, and particularly within which people who are looking for liberation encounter resistance, because it's all about the rules. So the rules of private property, the rules governing speech, all these rules are the rules of the game. And particularly the structures of late capitalism or welfare capitalism, or whatever we want to call it, or authoritarian capitalism, they're all operated, the people who are doing the stuff inside them are taking the rules for granted, or actually they hate the rules, but they're accepting that the rules are going to determine what they can do in different circumstances. A revolutionary goal is to change a large number of the rules so that different people will do better and other people will do worse. And sometimes everybody will do better when it's possible to make it a whole positive sum thing. But the rules are the objects of the struggle. Now, it's true that in a stabilized situation, which is not revolutionary, the rules on that level are no longer the objects of struggle. So we're no longer talking about radically reducing the power of owners vis-a-vis workers so that we have a different form of management and control of industrial property. We're talking about, and we're not also talking about changing in structures of the rules that would, for example, dramatically modify the racial subordination of, let's say, in the United States, people, Black people, vis-a-vis the wealth gap. So the wealth gap is overwhelming, it's based on the rules, but the basic discussion we're talking about is much more, Gramsci would say, it's the war of the trenches. We're just trying to figure out, push things in one direction or another in the direction of liberation, but understanding we're, so to speak. So in that situation, it's still really important to get rules changed. I mean, I just think it's wrong not to begin with the idea that we want lots of rules changed. And in fact, that getting the rules changed, wait a minute, am I back? Yeah, getting the rules changed is a question of conflict. Peter's image of social movement triumph is a moment in which the social movement has so much momentum that it overwhelms opposition. Not that there's no opposition. And in my generation, we discovered that a very large number of people who thought their opposition had been utterly overwhelmed are now in control of the whole country. So it's not in any way, it didn't work out that the conflicts were abolished by the triumph of the movement. But the rule changes were great. So I would say that what is the relationship between law and the possibilities of social movement? When it's used by social movements to change rules, that's one of the ways in which social liberation can be achieved. Now, I'm totally with Nanette and with Peter on the, whatever you want to call it, the spiritualization or humanization agenda. I think that's also incredibly important, and that the possibility of massive changes in the rules is to some extent altered by changes of consciousness of the character of the legal system. So defetishizing it and exposing it on the one hand, but also making it more human on the other. They're great things to do, but I'd sort of see them as, there's no but, they're great things to do, period. And I guess the way I think about it, I don't think it's great not to incorporate an analysis of how the rules are screwing everything up into the practice of spiritualization. And Peter totally does that. So Peter's work is also a study of how the system of rules, because his systems includes the system of rules, produces the world of alienated false selves.
Thank you, Duncan. How does that square with the idea of pluralism? Another reading of Peter's work can be also tracked back to the idea of not only state rules, but also a pluralism of rules in which both movements and communities can grow and somehow fight back formalized, centralized, bureaucratized, institutionalized law. How big is the presence of communities and pluralism in Peter's work? What would you say, Gary, Peter, Nanette, Lisa?
I think I think that's a very insightful take on Peter's work. I wouldn't say that Peter was a pluralist, because Peter wasn't really a political philosopher to be located on on that kind of line, but in the sense of the central ideas of the liberatory ideas of pluralism, of tolerance and openness. Yeah, I think that the pluralism is maybe a drained of its vitality version of what Peter was trying to say with stuff. I wanted to just connect with just a quick quote from Peter. Do I have it right? The Supreme Court is a figment of the collective imagination. And I just wanted to, this is really going back to our discussion of the role of law and social change. So I just wanted to just throw that quote in the mix. But others may have other reactions to the pluralism question.
Thank you, Gary.
I have a reaction. I think that the sense of pluralism that's, I think, the typical Colombian idea of pluralism, which is the recognition that different communities have radically different normative orders, even though inside the same state. So formally, there's a national legal normative order, and all the rest are either incompatible with it or delegations of it. So that it is essential to recognize not just that they're autonomous, they function autonomously, and to also honor their claim to ethical superiority to state law. I don't think that's much of a theme of Peter's work, that form of pluralism. I think he would say, so that, I mean, it's an interesting suggestion. I think the sense in which Peter is intensely pluralist, and maybe this is what Gary is saying, is an extreme commitment to the point of view of the other, which Nanette described, I think, extremely accurately, that just the endless trying to figure out the point of view of the other involves respect for the ethical and normative impulses of the other, and therefore implies a kind of pluralism on that level. But I don't think he was thought about the classical, say, Portuguese Colombian version of pluralism.
Okay, thank you, Duncan. I think that we are getting to the end of our event. We promised that it'd be close to 2 hours, and we are about that, getting to that point. I wish we had more time to keep talking a little bit more, but I think that it's for us time to close. I want to thank everybody that came to the event, either at the university or through the internet. And of course, I want to thank Magnolia, Jose Hernan, Javier Santander, and all of the and all the people that helped us make reality this translation into Spanish of Peter's work. And of course, I want to thank Peter, Lisa for their trust, and my good colleagues, Gary, Nanette, and Duncan for their presence today. And if you want to say something as goodbye, please go ahead.
Thank you, Diego. This was great. Thank you for doing it.
Thank you, Duncan.
I want to thank everybody, and particularly, do I understand these are many of your students that were in the class?
Yes.
Thank you, Diego's students, for your attention and engagement, and I hope many of you end up reading Peter's book. I think you'll really love it. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yes,
Gary.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Diego, and everyone. Thank you to our interpreter. And it's just been wonderful being here with you all. Much
Thank you,
appreciated.
Nanette.
Yeah, it's great to hear your students sounding so engaged. It was really heartening. And thank you again, Diego, for all your work on this project.
Thank you, Lisa. And all right, good afternoon to everybody. Goodbye. Have a good rest of week and see you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow.
See you soon.